Hello and welcome. My name is Alan, and we are back with more about the executive branch of the United States. Today, we will be delving into the John Adams presidency. It was only one term, but it was part of the first real partisan politics. This is where America gained one party versus the other instead of multiple parties or no parties. Because while George Washington uh, believed in the Federalist ideas, he did not want to associate himself with a party. So yeah, and thus Washington himself had no party affiliation. John Adams did. He was the he was a Federalist and the only Federalist to be elected as president, because the following president, Thomas Jefferson, would be a Democratic Republican. Now, today the Federalist Party no longer exists, but the Democratic Republicans do. Their name went through a bit of change, and they are your modern day Democrats. The older of our two modern parties. But, yeah, let's go ahead and take a look at who was in John Adams' presidency in the executive office during this time. Now, Adams would be the president, of course. Like I said, he was president for one 4-year term. And vice president was Thomas Jefferson. Remember, Constitution originally stated person with the most votes becomes president, person with the second most becomes the vice president. This would be changed after Jefferson was elected president, because him and Burr were on a statistical tie. And so after Jefferson, you had to start picking running mates, or, you know, I forget how it was specifically done, but now, regardless of say, we pick running mates for presidential candidates. Now, as Secretary of State, we still had Timothy Pickering from the Washington administration. He would stay on until 1800. And he would be replaced for the remainder of Adams' presidency by John Marshall. Yes, the John Marshall who would become Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Now, we still had Secretary of Treasury, and that was still Oliver Walcott Jr. from the Washington Presidency. Uh, let's see, he would be replaced by Samuel Dexter in 1801. Now, this is kind of what's interesting. Samuel Dexter, while he wasn't ever in the cabinet for an extended period, he held two cabinet positions, because before he took over for Walcott Jr., Secretary of War James McHenry ended in 1800, and Dexter took over for him in 1800 as the Secretary of War. So he was Secretary of War and Secretary of Treasury. He was almost basically John Adams' cabinet, even though he was only in there for a short time. It's really interesting. As Attorney General, we have Charles Lee, so he stayed over for John Adams' full term as Attorney General. So yeah. But we do have a new cabinet position opened. Secretary of the Navy. We have Secretary of War. They would go on to handle the ground troops. Now, we did have a Navy, not a recognized Navy, but we did have ships that fought during the Revolution. But yeah, we would now have a Secretary of the Navy, and the first Secretary of the Navy would be Benjamin Stoddert, sorry, Benjamin Stoddert, and he would serve as the first Secretary of the Navy under Adams. There would be no replacement for him while Adams was in presidency. So yeah, that's the cabinet. It's a pretty simplified one. A lot of holdovers from the Washington presidency, and then a new cabinet position. Now, he would, under Adams, well, let's start off by saying, under Washington, there was several appointments to the Supreme Court. He appointed the original Supreme Court and its original Chief Justice, John Jay, and he appointed many of the succeeding justices. Let me go ahead and pull this back up. Supreme Court justices. I can't type. But anyway, yeah. he would appoint all these justices. Where is that list? There we go. List of Supreme Court justices. So he appointed John Jay, John Rutledge, William Cushing, James Wilson, John Blair, and James Iredell as the original the original justices of the Supreme Court. Now, Washington also appointed uh, Thomas Johnson as a replacement for John Rutledge, William Patterson as a replacement for Thomas Johnson, and yeah, John Rutledge would come back and serve, well, would serve temporarily as Chief Justice, but would eventually be rejected. He would replace John Jay, but him himself would be rejected. Samuel Chase would replace, let's see, where is he? John Blair, and Oliver Ellsworth would become Chief Justice number 3, replacing John Rutledge. Now, under the Adams administration, we have 3 members put on the Supreme Court. They were all replacements themselves. We would have Bushrod Washington put on the Supreme Court to replace, who was it? Yeah, buddy. Oh, sorry, I missed 2 people. I'm blind as a bat, so I apologize. Okay, we talked about William Patterson replacing Thomas Johnson, Rutledge replacing Jay. Samuel Chase would replace Blair. John Blair. Okay, but also we have Oliver Ellsworth. Okay, no, I didn't miss anybody. Okay, my apologies again. I'm going crazy. Anyway, it was supposed to be Bushrod Washington replacing Wilson. James Wilson. There he is. So Bushrod Washington replaced James Wilson. John Adams also got to replace Alfred Moore on the Supreme Court, who would replace James Iredell. And then finally, he would get to place one of the most influential Chief Justices in Supreme Court history on the court with John Marshall. Yes, the same John Marshall that also served as his Secretary of State. John Adams appointed him as Chief Justice to replace Oliver Ellsworth. So yeah, he he makes an impact even though he's only there for one term, 4 years. Now, under John Adams, there's also a number of other events going on. We have the XYZ affair in France. We'll talk a little bit more about it in the next episode. There's the quasi war, our relations with Spain. He helped settle us into the move to Washington, D.C., because remember, the nation's capital was in New York. It would be moved to Philadelphia, but it would be toward the end of the Adams presidency that it would finally uh, be in Washington, D.C. And the District of Columbia itself would be fully organized uh, under the District of Columbia Organic Act. So yeah. So yeah, he's got some impact like Washington does. The Alien and Sedition Acts. Now, this is something that, like the XYZ affair, is a little negative on Adams' term. He had Fry's Rebellion. There was also the claim of midnight judges because he essentially took his Secretary of State, John Marshall, and before he left office, he put him in as Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. It's kind of dirty, but John Marshall lasted a while. He was actually a pretty decent Chief Justice, really influential. So yeah. Now, he would lose in the election of 1800 to Thomas Jefferson. Jefferson and Burr actually split the ticket again, and this is why we no longer elect the next in line to be vice president. We pick running mates. But yeah. But John Adams was a pretty okay president. He had ups, he had downs. He had some pretty steamy letters with his wife Abigail Adams. But yeah, the Adams presidency will is a influential one despite only being one term. Next episode we will be going over the events, talking a little more in depth about all the notable events, XYZ affair, quasi-war, stuff like that happened during Adams' presidency, and any notable laws and so on. So, but that will be it for this episode. As always, educate thyself. Think, read, study, learn. Someone tries to tell you something you have trouble believing, ask them to cite their sources. I will be citing sources myself in the description below the video. I'll see you all in the next one. Until then, later.